right. We'll start here in just a moment. Reagan, my son, is grabbing some lessons for you folks, and then the sign-in for that. So today we're going to be talking about the standard and the Constitution, just talking about the standard of the Republic and then the Constitution itself. Primarily, the material for this book is from this lesson is from this book called Back to the Republic, The Golden Mean, The Standard Form of Government by Harry Atwood. This is edition number... I don't know. This is the 10th edition. So this should wet your whistle. Next week, we'll have a very special guest. You guys are going to upgrade next week. Next week is a big upgrade. Our lawyer friend, who hopefully knows more about the government than I do, Dr. Kevin Montney, will be teaching next week. So anyway, I look forward to hearing that later. I'll hear it on tape delay or rain delay or whatever it is. So we're really blessed by the people we have in our church, and I'm glad that we can have those pinch hit. You may ask, where am I going next week? Wherever my wife tells me to, Bob, that's where I'm going. Sounds good. So sounds like a good idea. So we're doing the class Back to the Republic. It's unofficially through our Wisconsin Watchman group. We have a quote to start out with, and it says, "By my favorite president, the nation which forgets its defenders will be itself forgotten." Calvin Coolidge. So, is that anyone else's favorite president, Calvin Coolidge? Is that anyone else's? Silent Cal? No, just me who likes Calvin Coolidge. All right, but Calvin Coolidge is fairly libertarian in his demeanor and all that. So anyway, but when you look at our nation, the last, well, I'm going to say several years, probably in the last 10 years, there's definitely been more criticism of those who serve in the military, specifically those who are in law enforcement. Criticisms have been pretty heavy for that, defund the police and stuff like that. Just keep the extras up there. And we have to be careful. If you forget those who are defending our nation, sooner or later it'll be forgotten itself. So Wisconsin Watchman, some information for you there. You can like us on Facebook. You can join us during our next Wisconsin Watchman meeting. We'll have one in a couple months. We're taking the summer off. On a side note, we're working behind the scenes, looking to have some people run for office. I know that Katie Campbell's been working diligently on it. And so we're hoping to flip the Winnebago County Board. So that'd be pretty interesting if we can do it. So you'll be hearing more information on that. In the Bible, turn to Romans 13. And we're just going to read a couple verses there. And I just want to talk a little philosophy before we head right into the actual lesson. And so in verse number 1 of Romans 13, it says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then be not afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake." So, 1776, this is open discussion. 1776, you got a bunch of guys with muskets, angry colonists, a bunch of treasonous fellows. We look at July 4th is coming up, also known in England as Happy Treason Day. And so you have this grouping of colonies, writes the ultimate John Deere letter I'm aware. It's supposed to be a little funny, just a little funny, but small group. So there we go. See, he laughs, but he knows I'll yell at him later. Anyway, writes the ultimate John Deere letter. And dear John, now I'm getting mixed up. So he writes the letter to, or they write the letter to King George, and they present all sorts of information to them saying why they want to leave the United Kingdom. So were we within our rights to do that? Reagan gives the answer according to England, no. What do you guys think? 1776, we shouldn't even, according to the Bible, we have no reason to, right? The Bible says, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. So God put King George in charge, so. Chuck. Taxation without representation, okay. Okay, so they chose to separate because of that. Biblically, did they have a foot or ground to stand on, Brother Eric? There's more to the story than just my take. I don't like this. He's already calling me out in front of everybody. Brother Jacob.
Romans 13 seems to be predicated upon that power enforcing that which is good.
Now keep in mind, when did Paul write this? What kind of government's in place? Is it a republic? Roman government, not known for their friendliness. I'm hoping Kevin Monty gives me an answer. I'm hoping he's probably like, don't even call on me. One of the early things in our colonies was, for example, let's say we'll just use Winnebago County, not that was around in 1776. But if Winnebago County was officially an Anglican county, the official religion of Winnebago County was Anglican. You didn't have to be a member of the Anglican Church, but if you weren't a member of the Anglican Church in some of the colonies, you'd actually have to pay extra tax. So they'd punish you if you weren't part of that. So even if it wasn't let's say, a compulsion to be a member of the church, you'd have to pay a fine for it. So there's all these rights that are getting infringed upon. Now note some of the things that are in the Bill of Rights. Things like you don't have to house soldiers, you don't have to quarter them, the ability to have gun rights and all those. So when you're reading the Declaration of Independence, the most famous of the little section there, the most famous sentences, we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them are what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so we're endowed by our Creator with certain things. So these colonists said, look, God has given us certain rights. We should have the ability to have, because of God, He's ordained it, we should be able to have free worship and free ownership of guns, have property rights, all these things. And this is what their thinking is. And so they're going to push back against England. Now, if you just stay in Romans 13, you may have some other problems. But there's a big Bible. And so over and over, you get to see that God's made us free moral agents. And the more Christian a nation is, henceforth the republic becomes more important. It's representative government. It's having the ability to choose for yourself. Christianity lends itself to what? You making your own choices, even if they're bad. If Bob Warner wants to drink 3 Monster energy drinks this weekend, it may not be a good idea for him, but he should be free to make that decision. And so even though comparatively the English government wasn't as probably tyrannical as our current government at that time, it sure was an infringement. So free people want to be free. So what is the function of government? So here it talks about the function of government. What is government supposed to do? Jacob mentioned it.
Basically enforce that which is good by taking revenge on that which is evil.
Yeah. So look back in the Old Testament. Old Testament, you have Moses comes up with all these laws. Now, you stone homosexuals, you stone disobedient children. Stone disobedient children. Anyway, but they're stoning people, they're leaving them. They don't have traveling prisons. So when they're writing the Pentateuch, they're a nomadic tribe. They're moving around. They don't have prisons, so they have to take care of the problem. It's pretty severe and all that. What's another reason why they would have these things like stoning, for example, children? Why do they have that rule? Who's going to be doing the stoning? Is it just the parents? It's actually the government. The government is the one doing it. And so henceforth, they're basically putting the weight on the government. Achan gets stoned. We see people get stoned in the New Testament, but it doesn't seem to be as widespread. Government actually restrains vengefulness. Have you ever been thankful that you've slowed down your revenge on somebody? Have you ever wanted to punch somebody in the face? Bob, you ever want to punch anyone in the face? Never. Mrs. Warner, have you ever wanted to punch Bob? No, I'm just kidding. So there's times when we want immediate revenge, but we're generally better off when we take a step back. And we're even better served when we have a group of peers make that decision for us, a jury, right? We go through a jury trial and the jury decides, and then the government decides what the punishment's going to be. It slows things down. The government slows down process. In fact, I say that sometimes our government is best served when there's gridlock. You know, if you have a Republican Senate and then you have a Democratic House and a Democratic White House, at least it slows things down. The government's generally best when it's not working at all. In fact, I want them to have 365 federal holidays. So every day is a federal holiday. We'd save a lot of money and we'd save a lot of hassle. It'd be better that way, Brother Allen. Trust me. So anyway, but the government's supposed to execute judgment on people. So if someone does me wrong, they're the ones that are supposed to go out of their way and take care of the problem for me. There is a government process to take care of those who can't handle themselves and to dispense judgment. And those are the things we like. So anyway, that was for free. That had nothing to do with the lesson today, but I had to throw something in from the Bible. All right, so here we go. Here's the standard. And these are in your notes. If you were asked to suggest a word that epitomizes in the most effective and comprehensive manner the sum of human effort in the achievement of civilization, what would your answer be? Undoubtedly the word standards. By the processes of reasoning and experience in the various fields of activity and thought, standards have been evolved to guide mankind in the onward march of civilizations. There are standard ways to do everything, right? This is going to sound like it really came out of right field, because it probably did, but I saw Eric. So Eric, you came to mind. And actually, I saw Bob and you. And so Bob came to mind. I thought jerky with you, and I thought gutting deer with Bob. That's what I thought of. Anyone ever gut a deer before? I am not very good at gutting deer. What I'm hoping for is that Bob Sturts will show up and he will gut the deer. Bob, how fast does it take you to gut out a deer? Is there a certain process you use? He knows the feel of it. He knows the process of it. He knows how to get the knife not to hit the gut bag. He knows how to do a million different things. There's a standard in how to gut deer. There's a way to do it, and you want that out of there so the deer meat doesn't get nastied up. You want it to get cool as fast as possible. There's a way to smoke meat. There's a way to do things. There's a standard for how we do things. And so even in our church, when they say, well, that church has standards, there is nothing wrong with standards. Standards is not equivalent to sin. It's how you operate. It's how you function. You may not agree with the standards, but they are what they are. There's a standard for music. There's a standard for dress. There's a standard for Bible. There's a standard for platform etiquette. There's a standard for how we teach. There's a standard for a million things we do. There has to be a way you function over and over so you're good at it. Could you imagine if every week we changed a service? Do you know how painful it was during COVID to have to do 100 new things? Where before you just come in and you do church and it'd be magical. It'd be like, boom, you got church. Church is easy. We're going to get done with church. It's going to be over. Then all of a sudden you're showing up all day. You got videos and you realize how bad you look on video consistently. Bob, you haven't lived until you've seen yourself on video going, ew. And so everything changed overnight and the standard was upset. And as we've moved forward over this last year, we've established a new standard. So some things have been standard for a long time, but when you get a standard, it is actually through reasoning and experience in the various fields of activity and thought. Standards have evolved from what? The guide mankind in the onward march of civilization. And we, using Bob's own terminology, he said one of the reasons why he can gut a deer so fast is experience. Experience. So, from the birth of a political speculation, treatises on politics have frequently discussed the question, what is the best form of government? And so last week we talked about Aristotle. And Aristotle talked about the autocracy, he talked about democracy, and then he had the aristocracy that he promoted. And the aristocracy ended up having some problems. So then we find when 1788, when the Constitution comes about, that the standard form, the golden mean, the in-between is the republic. So the men who founded this republic answered that question by evolving the standard form of government. It's the right standard in the science of government, just as the golden rule is a correct standard in the philosophy of right living. The 10 Commandments in the realm of law, the 10 digits in the science of mathematics, the alphabet and languages, the institution of a monogamous marriage in domestic relationships. By the way, one man and one woman nonetheless. So how do we know that these are the standards? Because they've evolved, and I know we're using a word that kind of makes us twitchy, but it's evolved through reasoning and experiment. And they've been tested by experience and demonstration. Nothing was discovered or evolved up to the time their adoption that worked as well. And nothing has since been evolved that could be substituted for them with profit and universal approval. So there's something that works the best, and we stick with it. So all of the standards referenced above, except the standard form of government, have met. I read that, excuse me. Anyway, I wanted to read the second part. It meets a severe test as can be applied to any of the standards named. So here we go. During 1,000 years of history to the founding of this republic, government has been devised which gave way to its people, freedom, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of press, security of individual rights, popular education, and universal suffrage. So the ability to vote and all this. So now let's pause for a second. The idea of freedom, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of press, is that unique even today? And poor Mr. Montney is standing here, but he knows more about stuff than I do. Are you aware of any other countries that have true freedom of speech? And I think, like, whether you're talking England, Canada, countries that seem like us in a lot of ways, they don't have the level of freedom of speech we do. People can say some really pugnacious and awful things in public and not get arrested for it. And so for us, we say this, is that we want pugnacious and awful ideas out there in the marketplace so we have something to compare them to. We want to say that in the marketplace of ideas, that when they go out there, when they're out in the open, that people are going to make a judgment on it. That people are going to say that is a good idea or bad idea. We don't want people silenced. Now I understand if you yell fire in a movie theater, etc., but or libel and all that. But we're talking about just simple bad ideas. Rebecca Longsine can have a bad idea. She made one several years ago. We're not going to talk about which one it was. Any guess? It was marrying me. She had no idea what she's getting with you. Anyway, but she should be free to have bad ideas. Then, freedom of religion. Should Muslims have freedom of religion in our country? Should Sikhs have freedom of religion in our country? Should Jews have freedom of religion in our country? Should Catholics have freedom of religion? Absolutely. You want to know why? Because then we get to keep our freedom of religion. I'm okay when there's bad ideas out there because it allows us to be differential in the marketplace. Freedom of press, security of individual rights, those are all popular and good things. And so during the first 100 years of the existence of this standard form, the republic, a government, all these privileges were secured. In that first century of our history, we developed a larger galaxy of great statesmen because they were working and thinking along those lines and have been developed by all of the governments in the history of mankind. We harmonized under the splendid citizenship, people of many nationalities coming together to a shore. With varying ambitions and ideals, we withstood the strain of the Great Civil War and came out of it stronger and better. Maybe that's a little debatable. But we went through this awful Civil War and we came out. Think about all the statesmen that came from 1776 all the way through, even through, I don't know, let's say the early 20th century. But things, when you get Woodrow Wilson, when you get some other people, they thought differently. They didn't view the republic like we view the republic. Think about all the statements. John Jay. You look at some of those early founders, Thomas Jefferson. Now, these guys weren't just, and I know I mentioned Thomas Jefferson, or you could use John Adams. Not only were they presidents, they were also ambassadors. They were also writing documents. You read the Federalist Papers. You had people who were on top of their game in terms of presenting what the republic should be. So it was the first form of government that worked well, and no form of government has since been devised which has met with such universal approval. But for some unexplainable reason, it has not met with universal adoption. So, I know we're in America, and here we are. And I'm thinking if you're in this room, you probably have an idea that the republic that we're in, especially the pure republic, not so much maybe today, but the idea of the republic, the Constitution, is the best government ever devised on the face of the earth. So I believe that. So if it is the best government devised on the face of the earth, why don't other countries choose to adopt it? We talked a little bit about it the last couple of weeks, but there's probably more to it. Joe, Brother Zimmerman, excuse me.
I think the first thing in itself is that a lot of times there's people that are in power that don't want to lose power. I think that's a part of it. I think that in itself goes a long way. But there's also change. I don't know anybody that likes change in itself. A lot of times it has to come through radical takeovers and things like that. Even France killed their own monarch. You know, even though when they had the opportunity to come up with adopting the republic, they chose democracy.
Brother Joe mentions the French Revolution. By the way, French Revolution, way different than our revolution. I just want to point that out. If you've read about the French Revolution, pretty different flavor. One was much more humanistic. But he mentions change, power. What else? Brother Ives.
It takes a people who know the Lord and know his ways to want to have a country that is run on those principles.
So you need to have a holy set of people. And I'm using this broadly because not every one of our founding fathers were born-again Christians. We understand that. We get that. But even those who would be universalists, the John Adams of the world, those who are maybe deists, they had a sense of godliness which was greater probably than most people that show up on a Sunday morning at our church. I shouldn't say that out loud because I might be hurting someone's feelings, but I'm saying those guys on a level showed more piety than we do. And so here we get to see that there was a holiness to these people, even if they weren't necessarily born-again Christians. They had Christian sensibilities about themselves. What else? Reagan. People love having the government tell them what to do. Isn't it really weird? couldn't imagine liking the government telling what you do, but people do. COVID was a good example of that, by the way. Brother Chuck.
Two things. Number one, there's people that don't like change. So where they are, they're comfortable, so they're not willing to change. Another thing is the government suppresses, just like England tried to suppress the opposition, the government suppresses their opposition.
So Brother Chuck seconds the idea that people don't like change. We're independent Baptists. We really hate change. I mean, I think we're, I'm surprised we're not still in leisure suits here. I mean, we really hate change anyway. But beside that, more importantly is talk about the government. What is the government solution for all problems? More government. It's always the government solution to any problem is more government. So, the 9/11, when that happened, terrible, terrible incident. There's some people in here that weren't even born. It's hard to believe that's going to be 20 years ago in September, but when that event happened, when 9/11 happened, right away there was this thing called the Patriot Act kicked off, and then they created a new federal organization. They created the Department of Homeland Defense, and then they put a bunch of things underneath there. So when there was a problem, they created more government. That is what government does. Government creates more government. They don't want to give more freedom. They want to create more restrictions. So, okay, anything else? Rebecca. Government, if it's going to function, someone's got to take personal responsibility. That's not a real popular thing. I understand we're in this room, but I'm telling you, personal responsibility is not a very popular thing that's out there right now. Let me present to you an idea here as we'll move forward. But there's 3 guys in a book of the Bible called Nehemiah. The 3 guys in that book, their names are Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem did not want the walls back up in Jerusalem. It is my proposition that the reason why Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem did not want the walls back up in Jerusalem is because money. They were making money off those people. And if they didn't have access to those people, they would lose money. They had power, they had access, and it was going to cost them money. If you're going to change our government and you're going to change the way it is, how many people would be crying over their power, their access, and their influence? I mean, you would have people going crazy. The amount of money that goes through Washington is unbelievable. How many people leave Washington poorer than when they went in? Like, minus our last president, I don't think anyone leaves Washington with less money. Guys like Mr. Biden and Mr. Obama and Mr. Bush and all these guys, they leave government with a lot of money. Bernie Sanders, I mean, that's my kind of socialist, a guy with 3 or 4 houses, right? And so Washington is filled with politicians who leave Washington with more money than what they came in with. And so now you're going to tell them they have a more restricted government? Wow, that's a hard sell. That's a real hard sell. So let's move forward. So the people of all ages have quite generally failed to recognize the merit of the work of the benefactors of the race and the prophets of their time, and have frequently paid homage to those who were finally revealed as the impostors. They humiliated Westinghouse for discovering the air brakes. They laughed at Alexander Graham Bell for discovering the telephone. They persecuted Columbus for discovering a new world and unfolding hidden truth. They gave Socrates the cup of hemlock for philosophy now taught in our universities. And most importantly is they crucified Christ, who came to lead the way and set the standard of right living for all mankind and an exclusive salvation for all who believe. People hate things that are new. Change was mentioned twice. Did Jesus Christ present something better than Judaism of that day? Did Jesus Christ present the best possible thing you could do? And what kind of things was Jesus Christ teaching that was revolutionary at the time? So, here's Jesus. He looks around. He sees the Roman. He sees Roman Dr. Ives. And Dr. Ives, he is the Roman, he's the soldier. He sees Jacob and he goes, you know what, Jacob, that Jew, he is going to walk with me 1 mile because legally I can make him do it. And he gives him his armor, he gives him his stuff. And Jacob is compelled to go with him 1 mile. What does Jesus say to Jacob? Don't go with him 1 mile. Go with him 2 miles. Don't hate those that despitefully use you. Don't hate those that do wrong to you. Don't curse those that do wrong to you. You know what you should do to those people that do you wrong? Bless them. You're supposed to pray for them. You're supposed to care for them. So when Jesus comes on board, is that the antithesis of what's going on in Judaism? Now, an eye for an eye, right? And all of a sudden, here's Jesus comes along. Do you think that ruffled a few feathers? In Sunday school this week, I'm going to be teaching on the crucifixion. That is the end result of the teachings of Jesus Christ. They hated him so much for what he was presenting. They refused the kingdom of God. They refused to see him as Messiah because what he was teaching was not what they wanted. It just happened to be what they needed. And a republic form of government isn't necessarily the things that people want, but it's the things they need. We need not to have government tell us how to live our lives. All right, let me move forward. There's no reason to suppose that the framers of the Constitution realized the full significance of their work. The ultimate purpose of many of our greatest discoveries was not fully revealed until long after the discoveries passed over the Great Divide. And so everyone has a threefold relationship. And so when we look at this relationship, we see it this way. We got a relationship to God. We have a relationship to government. We have a relationship with society. And when one acquires the right concept of God and the right concept of government, it almost assures a right relationship towards society. It's a three-legged stool, as it were. And when one of those legs is broken off, what happens? The stool falls over. You need to have people who have a right relationship with God and a right relationship with government, and then they can have a right relationship with society. The most important event that has occurred since the creation was the coming of Christ and the formation of the church. For he came to establish the standard of right living for all mankind, and most importantly, salvation to sinners. The other, and it's not nearly as important, but an important event, was the forming of the republic under the Constitution because it provided the standard form of government. So many have come to regard the wording, the style, and the tradition of the Constitution as almost sacred. But to my mind, the most sacred thing about the Constitution is that it embraces just 4 elements. It embraces 4 elements. First, an executive. Is the executive a king? Should the executive of our nation rule our country through executive order? 2, there's a legislative body who are required to do just 2 things. By the way, they're supposed to pass bills, and the executive is supposed to sign it into law. The executive orders were only meant to buttress those laws. But over the last couple decades, those things have run rampant. It's a bad way to run government is through executive order. Just throwing that out there. All right, 3, to create a judiciary to pass upon the justice and legality of their government acts and to recognize certain inherent individual rights. That is the foundation of our government. It's an executive branch. It's a legislative branch creating the laws. And then you get the judiciary basically verifying the justice and legality of the government system. Then they are supposed to care about our certain inherent individual rights. It's been the general custom of the writers to divide our government into 3 departments, but the elements of inherent individual rights as an essential to the other departments as the 4th wheel of a standard vehicle is to the other 3 wheels in the dominion of transportation. So the additional wheel you add to the standard 4-wheel vehicle, the more useless and confusing the vehicle would become. Likewise, the more additional elements you add to the 4 elements provided for by the Constitution, the more useless and confusing the government becomes. So, for example, how many wheels are on your car? 4. Now, there's some guys who drive around in motorcycles that have 3 wheels or some sort of 3-wheeled bike, but the 4 wheels is stable, isn't it? So when my wife says, do you want to get a motorcycle? No, I like being able to keep my brains in my head. I don't want to scoop them up with a soup ladle. I am big on keeping this in. It's thick, but it's all mine. So 4 wheels is very stable. 2 wheels, less stable. 1 wheel, even less stable. And so here we get this Constitution with kind of these 4 wheels on there. And so individual rights are important. The Constitution provides a system of checks and balances. The executive can veto an action of most of the legislative body, but the legislative body can override the veto of the executive by a 2/3 vote. So there's a check and balance with each other. The judiciary passes upon the justice and legality of the acts of the executive and the legislative body. And the executive and the legislative body have an appointive power and have the power to remove the lack of good behavior. So they have checks and balances upon each other, right? Everyone's checking and balancing each other. In our church, do we have checks and balances? Yes. I know Bob and I was the treasurer, he was one of the trustees. We would make sure the finances of the church were in order. We're supposed to be checking each other out. This is the way it works. Wings as Eagles has a board, and every year they report to the board all the finances. They make sure that we have an outside auditor come in to check things out. We want to make sure that we are balanced out. We have checks and balances. And so here you get to see this picture of this 4-wheeled vehicle, as it were. And in that 4-wheeled vehicle, you get to see that there's these checks and balances. And you get to see that there's axles and all that stuff. So assume that the executive and legislative body are the front wheels of the government vehicle. And the check and balance between the axle that connects them. That the judiciary and individual rights are the hind wheels. And that the checks and balances represented by the axle between them. And that the reach connecting the 2 axles represents the checks and balances between the 4 elements. So everyone is checking each other out. So the next and most sacred thing about the Constitution is that it is to provide that the people could only do 2 things. First, vote for the president once in 4 years. Second, vote for the member of Congress from their district once in 2 years. And you may read and reread the Constitution. You cannot find another thing that the people are permitted to do. Because we're what? We're a constitution, or we're a republic. So, for example, who's going to vote on H.R. 1? House of Representatives, because it says H.R. 1, right? And so last November, Brother Bob walked in, I'm assuming, maybe he did absentee, I have no idea. We're just going to say he walked into a voting booth. He walked into a voting booth, and he looked at who his representative was, and he could choose Glenn Grothman or someone else, and I'm just venturing to guess. I know it's impolite to ask who he voted for. I'm guessing he probably voted for Mr. Grothman if he's in his district. And fills that box up, folds it up, and goes in there. So lo and behold, most people in our area voted for who? Glenn Grothman. So where's Glenn Grothman? He's in Washington. And there's going to be a bill put in front of him. And what's he going to do? He's going to put a vote. He's going to put a yea or nay on that bill. And so here, myself, as just one of you, anyone over 18 in that area who's in his district can vote for him. We're sending him out as our representative. But we don't all go to Washington and vote on things, do we? I'm not checking in, should we vote on this? No, we can contact the representative. We can let him know our feelings. We have a way to reach our government officials. We can talk to them. But for the next 2 years, from January to January, 2-year term, that person is representing me. And if they don't do what I like, and I think there's someone better, what can I do? Vote for the other one. Pretty unlikely there's probably going to be better than Glenn Grothman coming around anytime soon, but that's okay. People can disagree with that. And so whatever district is, that's what we're doing. Now on a state level, every 6 years, I guess 2, 2, and 4, something like that. Anyway, we have 2 senators, and their terms are every 6 years. We get to go into a voting booth, and as a state, we're deciding who's going to represent us in the Senate. And that person is representing us in the Senate. When there's a Senate bill in front of them, they're going to take care of that and vote on our behalf. That is our representation. But as an individual, we don't go out there and decide as a mob what the person's going to vote for, right? And as the presidential election, I love it when people say Donald Trump lost in 2016. Did Donald Trump lose in 2016? Did he lose the popular vote? Does it matter? Does not matter because we have an electoral college. I'm thankful for the electoral college. It may be clunky, it may be weird, it may be quote unquote antiquated, but you know what it allows? For us as Wisconsinites to have a vote or have a voice in the process. If we didn't have an electoral college, would we ever see a presidential candidate? We might see the bottom carriage of Air Force One flying across the country, but that would be about it. And so, lo and behold, our process is we get to vote for the president and our state representation. That is the limit of actually how we individually do something specific in government. We're leaving it up to the representatives because we have a republic and we're governed by laws. Anyway. So under the Constitution, it was assumed that we just select people with music. Under the Constitution, it was assumed that we just select people with music talent to give concerts, people with artistic talent to paint pictures, people with inventive ability to provide inventions, people of educational ability to teachers, people of theological ability to, as preachers, an architect to plan and supervise the construction of a building, a surgeon to perform an operation, an engineer for engineering work, just so people would elect men of government, governmental ability to to executive and legislative positions and permit them in a representative capacity to work out the varied and oftentimes perplexing problems of government. Should, plug your ears, Kevin, Dr. Kevin, should lawyers be the only people in Washington? No. Look at even guys like John Adams, who happened to be a lawyer. Do you know what else he was? Bob, do you know what he was? He was a farmer. Some of the best people in our government did other jobs. You want more than just one line of thinking in there, right? Would you want an accountant running a business? Probably not. Guys like me are risk averse. You can't have everyone be the same thing in a church, and you don't want the same thing in a government. You gotta add people who you think are going to add value to our nation. And whether or not you like Mr. Trump or not, the idea was he was a different politician, wasn't he? He provided a different perspective. We look for more than just people who work in normal government things or government institutions to work in government. We want a variety of people to provide a variety of expertise, to provide variety in what we do. And it's not a popular statement, but it's a fundamental fact that the people generally know comparatively little about government problems. While this statement is widely at variance with the vociferous contentions of the demagogue, it is a truth that the founders of the Republic thoroughly recognized and they acted in accordance therewith. And I go back to the Electoral College. Aren't you thankful that we did not stay or that we did not move to a popular vote? Exactly. All right, to summarize, the Constitution provides an executive, a legislative body that defines their qualifications and powers. It requires them to appoint a judiciary and to recognize certain inherent individual rights, and it defines the powers of the judiciary and enumerates the individual rights. It also provides that the people may vote once in 4 years for the executive and once 2 years for members of the legislative body. Those are huge things for our government. But I'm glad we don't work in a democracy. Can you imagine if our government worked like American Idol and they just had some 800 number that you could call into or some online voting for every bill? I think it's pretty dumb. I don't know if it's the dumbest thing. One of the dumber things that you hear out there is actually, do you know what the polls say about, and then they'll say something's popular or not? We shouldn't do things based on whether they're popular or not. What should we base what we do? If it's right. And I know it's not popular. That's okay. We don't live in a popular government. We operate in a government that's run by law. Oh, let's see here. I'm running out of time, so we're going to hop to this. The events have gathered to a head in this greatest of all war crises The time is ripe for the people of the world to understand that the Constitution provided for the four elements that constitute a republic and nothing more. We're trying to sound a trumpet that will rally to us a clear understanding and a more accurate use of governmental terms, which the all-important first step toward the decree of the law, getting back to the republic and grappling wisely and successfully with this grave international question. We want to go back to the republic. That's what we want. And so people will hoot and holler about everything else. But whether or not, I know I'm really, really towards the end, so if you're following me on a piece of paper. So just think about that. I'm going to leave you with a quote. The founders knew, by the way, if you have not listened or read Walter E. Williams is absolutely brilliant, very intelligent man, just died a couple years ago. The founders knew that a democracy would lead to some kind of tyranny. The term democracy appears in none of the founding documents. Their vision for us was a republic and limited government. So that's where we're going to end. Don't forget to get involved with Wisconsin Watchmen. We're going to dismiss in a word of prayer. If you have any other questions, please feel free to ask Dr. Kevin Montney. I love that. I love having you in here. You should be here every week, even when I preach. I love it. All right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this day. We thank you, Lord, for your graciousness to us, your love towards us. We're glad for the government that we have. I know it's not perfect, but I'm glad for the Constitution we have, the Declaration of Independence. I'm happy for the statesmen that have so much recorded evidence of what they intended this government to look like. Our nation should get back to being like a republic, moving away from governing through executive order, grinding through the legislative process, having judicial side of things that's not looking to be activist, but looking to read simply from a constitutional perspective. We ask that us as church people would be interested in what's going on at a local level, that we'd be interested in engaging with the county board, the city council, and that not only would we send them messages asking them to do things for us, etc., but that we'd earnestly pray for them. Our government needs us to pray for them. Help God's people to lift your name up in front of them, let them know biblical truth, and we ask that our nation would still have a chance to be able to have the propagation of the gospel to go through it, and that your name would be glorified. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.